Thanks very much, Luis. It's good to see you all here with us today. Thanks for joining us. As Luis said, my name is Mark Arthur, academic consultant for Macmillan based in Querétaro.
And Julian Sanchez, academic consultant based in Jalisco. And we're
Right.
very happy to welcome you to our first session of this Future Ready series.
Yeah, we are indeed. And as Luis said, there's been some uncertainty about the end of the school year this year. And so what we wanted to do is kind of make sure that you are ready to check your students' progress, to check their achievement, regardless of when your school decides to close its doors. You can see the aims of the session here.
And at the end of the day, Mark, we want other teachers to feel supported and prepared to assess their students in this crazy end of the year situation we have and start seeing assessment as a holistic process that involves this strategic planning that actually will formalize their practice and provide certainty to their students, right? So our objective for this session then is that by the end of it, you will be able to use your course book materials to gather a variety and meaningful evidence of your learners' progress and their achievement. And of course, the last stage that is not less relevant, that is providing clear and useful feedback to learners and parents.
Yeah, and so we're going to
And
start
well,
quickly looking at the Macmillan assessment tools that come with your course book. Then we'll talk about this idea of classroom assessment. We'll think about how we can formalize classroom assessment, and then we'll look at giving feedback, right? To get your brains in the right place and to get you thinking about today's topic, we're going to start with a little question for you, and you can answer us in the chat box if you like. On the slide, we see two different reasons for assessing our students. The first one says to identify students' progress in learning English, and the second one says to identify what students have learned during a specific period of time, a month, a year, a semester, etc. What other reasons for assessing your students can you think of? Can you tell us in the chat box any other reasons that you can think of for assessing your students? And I'll give you a few moments to think about that and tell us in the chat. And
let's
I'll,
see. Let's see
I'll
the reasons our teachers assess, Mark.
yeah, and I will apologize for interrupting Elian a few moments ago. Sorry, Elian. Uh,
No. I was just telling that we'd like to hear why is the reason they assess, why they do these tests, why are we so on to this final part of our school year? Why do we care about this assessment? So I think we have a comment already. So
yeah.
we have Mark to know the level of the grade, to know
Yep.
the level of the group, maybe.
Okay. Let's see if we can get a couple more suggestions. Oh, it's an interesting one, Elian.
Good
To
one.
verify if students are ready for a certification.
It's a nice one. I think that a lot of us are into getting these students ready to make these mocks, to make this evaluation, so we can know what evaluation they can take. I think we
I,
have one that says something about feedback, right? To
yeah,
give
I know
feedback and help
you're
them.
gonna like that one, right? You like that one, right?
They're gonna hear from me about feedback in a minute. So yeah, I think the teacher is going to agree.
Yeah, but it's a good one. That one's slightly different to the other ones that we've got, right? Which says to measure progress and identify difficulties, and to give them feedback. Andrea Rios to give them feedback and help them to improve their level, right? Excellent, excellent. Okay. Uh, on the slide, you're going to see some similar kinds of answers, Elian. Do you want to go through the examples on this slide?
Let's go ahead. I think that they are relatable to what our teachers are telling us in the chat. So we have to check students' use of a particular skill or language structure in a lesson to find out if we achieved our teaching objectives, which is very relevant because we tend to think assessment is only for students, but it can also help us to actually think and reflect about our own practice, right? To identify skills, language, attitudes students have developed in previous learning experience when we are doing this diagnostic assessment, to find out whether students like or dislike particular activities and why. We have a lot of reflection in our books about what students like, what they can do. to diagnose problems or strengths students have in a particular language area. I think some of our teachers are telling that in the chat. And my favorite one, as we said before, to help students become aware of their own learning process. And that is right, to see how we can help students to increase their level, to get a pathway on how they can work this development for their learning. Now, we know that you teachers, because of the end of the year, because of the situation we're living, we may be most interested in the second reason of the list, right? To identify what students have learned during a specific period of time, whether it is this last trimester or maybe whether it is the school year. So if we are more interested in this type of assessment to identify our students' advances, to identify our students' progress, well, Macmillan has you covered. So many of our course books come with assessment materials that are accessed via our Me app. We can also access through our different websites such as Servicios Macmillan Educación or the website me.macmillaneducation.com. So should you have any questions about how to log in, because we are assuming you can already log in into your account. Should you have any questions, please contact your consultant, your academic consultant. I think he or she will be very helpful and will be very happy to aid you with this access. So let's take a quick look on how we can access these assessment materials, Mark, shall we?
Sure, Elian, sure. So as Elian said, we're going to assume that you are able to access your account. I have one of my accounts open here. It's for the series Speak Your Mind. You may not be using Speak Your Mind, but much of what I'm going to say here will relate to your course. So some of our course books, most of our course books in the schoolwork section in the Me app have a section called Assessment. And in the assessment section, I can come to the dashboard. And in here, I have the option to add an assessment. I would just need to make sure that I'm choosing the right level. I would add assessment, and it gives me multiple options here. So I can choose a digital test, which my students would answer in their version of the Me app. I can create a paper-based test, which is assigned to specific students, and I can create a quick paper test, which doesn't require assignation to specific students. Now, for the purposes of this session, to keep things fairly brief, I'm going to add quick test, and I'm going to give this a name. So we'll call this one, what day is it today? It's Wednesday, right? So let's call this Wednesday, Mark, Elian, and I'll go to save. And now what I have to do is select the questions for my test, add the settings. And if I was going to assign it to specific students, I would be able to assign it to students here as well. I'm just going to go into add questions, and I have various options here. There's a bank of hundreds of questions I can choose from. I can create my own questions, but probably what most of us do would be to go to the ready-made tests. So in the case here for Speak Your Mind, I have different ready-made tests. I'm coming to the end of the school year, so I'm going to go to Unit 12. And it shows me the possible questions here from Unit 12. If I click on the preview option, I can have a quick look at the question and see if I would like to include it in my test. You can see this is a listening question here. I can play it if I want to play the audio. I'm going to assume that I'm happy with this option, and in fact, I'm happy with all of the questions, and I'm just going to go to next. It gives me a summary of the questions that I've selected here. I mean, we don't need to look at them, but just to give you the big picture, it's given me a summary of the questions that are included in the ready-made Unit 12 test. I'm scrolling all the way down to the bottom of the page. I think there's something like 54 questions here, something like that. And I'm just going to go to done. So that means I've selected my questions. And now I need to add the settings for my test. You saw before we had the option of digital, paper-based, or paper quick. I can change that again here if I wish. I can change the duration of the exam, although this is going to be paper-based, so I don't really need to do that here. I can include a cover sheet, an answer sheet. I can add a personalized message to my students here. So I might tell them good luck, for example. There's an option of adding the school logo. And when I'm happy with all of those settings, I can just go to Done and Submit. And you can see here that the app is now rendering my test. I've made tests in the past here. This one says Monday test 2, and that one's actually all ready to download. So if I click the download option here and I go to my downloads, we will see in a moment that my test folder is here, and I would be able to extract the content there. Just going to do that quickly. And the folder is going to open up. And it's probably quite small on your screen, but here I have the test audio. I have the student question sheet. In this particular case, I have Word version and PDF version. I also have the answer sheet and the audio transcripts. If I just open this one up so you can see it, in case you haven't done this before. Let's just open it up on my other screen here. Let me drag that across for you. And you can see that it's generated this PDF with a question sheet. Okay, so most of our courses come with the assessment tool in the Me app. Let me just close that down and go back to the app. Now, if I go back to the My Library section where we see our books, and I click on the course that I'm interested in, you can also access ready-made assessments for most of our courses in the Teacher Resource Center. So we have the Teacher Resource Center here. And in this particular course, this will open up in a moment, there's a folder which says tests. And actually there are more options here compared to the assessment tool, but we have the placement test, we have unit tests, we have mid-course tests, and we have end-of-course tests. And once again, I can just click download. They'll download onto my computer in a zip file. I'll have the audios, I'll have the answers, I'll have the question sheets. So through the Me app, either using the assessment tool, which we see here, or using the Teacher Resource Center, we're able to access the formal assessment material that comes as part of the course. Right, Elian?
That's right, Mark. So why don't we just do a quick recap so teachers can remember what we just saw in the Me app. So some of our courses will come with a Me assessment tool, which is going to help us create these tests that can be either digital or printed. But what happens if your course doesn't come with a test generator or with an assessment tool? Well, we actually have some courses with printable tests that are ready then in our Teacher Resource Center for series such as Bebop and Friends, Gateway to the World. We get to see these printable tests. Some of them come with a higher level, with a normal level, or even with some extra help for students. Now, in the case of the younger ones, for the grades of preschool, in case you're teaching with Bebop and Friends, with Doodle Town, or with Ferris Wheel, we also come with checklists that can help us assess student skills, that can help us assess what students can do. We can even get some comments, and of course they are aligned to our units in the course. Now, if we get to see the Teacher Resource Center for series such as Doodle Town, we can also find the school readiness resources, which are going to provide this checklist with information and technique for a whole child development in view of preparing children for the setup to primary. These checklists or these scales are going to help us assess students not only in terms of language, but also in terms of literacy, their physical development, math, cognitive, creative, and socio-emotional development too. They can be found, again, the Teacher Resource Center. You can download them, you can print them, you can even send them to students online if you would. But you're going to have a lot of resources to help you with this period. Now, of course, these formal assessment like tests, like this checklist, are not the only way to get evidence of learners' progress. We can actually get a broader picture. We can actually get students' progress through time instead of just a test score by making assessment more reliable and more valid. We can do this by incorporating other measures in addition to the test. So as our assessment period is not only just an exam and I check and I give you a score, but also combining different types of sources so we can get a bigger picture. In literature, combining sources of evidence for the purpose of assessment is referred to as triangulation. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, Mark?
Sure, sure. I think the kind of secret of triangulation is in its name, right? It implies three things. Definition here, the process of collecting data from several sources or in different ways in order to provide a fuller understanding of a phenomenon. In the case of assessment, here we're talking about combining formal tests with other measures such as performance assessment in the classroom. And performance assessment, again, defined here on the slide, the observation of behavior in the real world or a simulation of real life activity. We're simply referring to things that students do in your classroom, in your classes, as part of their everyday learning process. So we combine the formal test with measures of student performance in class. That's performance assessment. So we are incorporating different assessment instruments in order to get a more reliable and valid picture of our students' progress. Right, Elian?
That is right. And then this performance assessment can take form in different parts of our session. They can either be incidental observations, that are the cases where we are just going through our students. We get to check their participation. Some of them present. We're walking through their classroom and actually observing what they are doing. We're making judgments on learners' language proficiency during classes as students work. Now then, these incidental observations are going to be helpful. We can notice what is going on in our class every single day. But are they going to be as useful as an assessment tool if we just take a look at it during the class and then when I am grading students, I barely remember what I saw? Well, in those cases, we can actually formalize observations by planning them and recording evidence. As observations become assessment only when they are recorded systematically over time so that we can actually get to track students' process. We're not only just checking a score at the end of it, but we can see how they are advancing, how they are moving, and then their performance is actually noted. We are going through just a random observation and random judgment to actually planning ahead and really knowing what we are aiming with our students. Now, Mark, how might we do this? How might we formalize our observations?
Sure. And in a perfect world, we'd all be doing this already. And it's a very simple process. As we plan our course, as we look ahead to the coming weeks, the coming months of our program, we identify the unit objectives and we think about which competencies, which language areas we're going to be able to observe at different points during the course. On the screen here, you see the unit opener from the teacher's guide of one of our primary course books, Share It. And at the top of the page, we see the unit objectives. In this particular course, the objectives in Unit 6, Level 1 include naming parts of the body, talking about parts of the body, naming parts of the face, ask and answer questions about the faces. And then when I look at specific lessons, like Lesson 1 here, I have the lesson aims at the top again from my teacher's guide. And I see that in Lesson 1, the students are going to name parts of the body, and we're going to be working with vocabulary for head, hand, arm, leg, feet, and fingers. So I know that in Lesson 1, I can plan to observe my students using the specific language, which is the focus of this unit. And the most obvious way to do that, very simple way to do that, would be, as you plan ahead, to create a simple table, which would allow you to fill in the student's name, write down the focus that you're looking for, and then identify the different points during the unit where you're going to be able to observe those competencies or those language areas being used. So for example, here, let's imagine I have a student called Ricardo, and over the course of Unit 1, over the month that we're working on Unit 1, or was it Unit 6? Sorry, Unit 6 that we're working with body parts, I noticed that in lesson 1, for example, in the wrap-up stage, there was an opportunity to check Ricardo's use of the body parts. There's a game in lesson 2 called Guess the Robot. There's a vocabulary routine in lesson 4, and there's a share book activity in lesson 5. And as I work through those lessons with my students, I make notes on Ricardo's performance and I complete my table. You can do it like this as a table, or it could be more open-ended, like what we have here. So I'm focusing on lesson 1, unit 1 on page 88, and the objective is to name body parts. And I've noted here by observing Ricardo that he participates fully in the chant. He moves the correct body part most of the time. When saying the chant, he mixes up some singular and plural forms and needs support with the pronunciation of some words. And the idea is, over time, either through a table like this one or more open-ended kind of forms like this one, I gather evidence of my students' performance, my students' progress, which can feed in to my end-of-year assessment rather than basing everything on the final test. And this would be an example of triangulation using classroom assessment in action through planned observations.
So now that we brought up these performance observations, we may be thinking, which moments can I do this performance observation? Well, in fact, we can actually use any classroom tasks to assess our learners. And here I think we've talked enough time. It is time for us to listen to you, teachers, or at least to read you in the chat. And we want you to take a look at this table. We want you to take a look at these classroom activities. And some of them are talking about what the weather is like, asking and answering questions, reporting the main points of a news broadcast. We have many different variations of these activities. But what we want you to do is to take a look at this and tell us in the chat how many of these activities are similar to the ones in your program. Have you found any of these activities, any of these tasks in your series, in your books? Have you done any of this in your class? So why don't we give them a minute to think about it, Mark, and we start reading some of the teachers' comments. Which ones do you do the most when you're teaching a class, Mark? Which kind of activities do you like the most?
The first one on the list, I mean, everybody likes talking about themselves, right? So just getting students telling stories about the weekend or the holidays or whatever it is always a good one. But of course, you know, depending on the context you're working in, I've worked in a lot of business English contexts, so using the telephone would be a classic one. But what about you teachers? Are there any activities here that you recognize from your course book? What do you guys do with your students? Do you tell stories? Do they give directions? What are some similar ones for you? Let's see. Don't be shy, guys. Don't be shy.
Whether it is collaborating on an activity, working in an interview, maybe you have something different. You can actually tell us that too, if you would like to. But you can tell us in case you do any different activities, what activities do you do to check students' performance?
Yeah, somebody, please tell us. Very quiet in the chat, Elian. Maybe they're very busy taking notes on all of this fascinating information that we're giving them.
I know, or I mean, they could be telling us. They will be writing their story. You got them into telling a story. We've got a comment in there. Teacher Anais says, I've been doing all of them through different times, depending on the topic. And I think that is very relevant to have this variation, not to focus on one. We sometimes get to just get a lot into one type of activity and repeat it. But I think that teacher Anais is giving this variation to actually increase the skills students are gaining, right? Do you see any other comment, Mark?
Well, yeah, it's funny that because Maria says most of them, depending on the level they attend, and Lisette says I've used most of them as well, and that's great because that kind of leads us to the point of this, which is all of these activities could work for performance assessment, right? All of them could function as activities, tasks for performance assessment. Now, I was thinking because we have a very engaged group of teachers that are actually talking to us in the chat, I included a bonus question here for the teacher nerds in the group. And let's see if you can get it. All of the items in each column are connected in some way. So all of the items in the first column have some kind of connection. All of the items in the second column have another connection, a different connection. And finally, the items in the third column have a completely different connection. What connects the items in column 1? What connects the items in column 2? What connects the items in column 3? Let's see. I'm only going to give you 30 seconds on this because this is just my bonus nerd question. It's not really the focus of today's session, right, Elian?
That's right. Let's see if they can find this relation between telling a story, describing what is on television, talking about the weather. The teacher and I told us that is part of her daily routine, actually. What happened to the column in the middle? Discussing, asking and answering questions, interview. Let's focus on the keywords, and I think that is going to give you the answer. Let's see.
I think you're all busy thinking. So I'm going to count 15 seconds in my head, and I'm going to give you the answers if we don't have them.
We can put a timer on.
I think the third column is the most difficult one. The first one can be done. Oh, here we go. I think Lisette has
Yeah, we're getting the
discovered.
idea. Yeah.
She has the key here. The first one can be done by each student at a time. The second one seems more for pairs. And okay, you've pretty much got it there, Lisette. And then Alexa, thank you. There are all types of spoken communication tasks. Yes, yes, yes. So I think Lisette would get the virtual prize, virtual flowers, virtual gifts, literal kudos, virtual gifts, literal kudos. All of the items in column 1 are production tasks. They involve one student giving information, as Lisette says. All of the items in column 2 are interaction tasks. They involve more than one person. And all of the items in column 3 is quite complex, as Maria says. They are all examples of mediation activities. And mediation is about conveying concepts or ideas in different ways. Anyway, if you have questions about those, you can talk to your academic consultant and we can give you workshops on those kinds of things. Let's keep going with the focus of today's session and get back to the main point here, which is all of these activities could work as performance assessment tasks, right, Elian?
That's right. And now we can see the activities, we know what we focus on, but now that we are doing this performance assessment, we actually said we need a way to record the students' progress and to actually formalize it. So we're doing that by the use of checklists and rubrics. So some courses might come with rubrics that you can actually just use to measure students' performance. This is an example on the slide from Macmillan's Optimized Starts course, where we have the different indicators, we have the different functions that we are going to focus on. We're doing these observations in class. We can see another example. This one is actually from our book, Gateway to the World. In here, we're focusing on an activity, a productive activity, where students need to give a presentation to their partner, and we have this marking criteria described for us. So as we know, when we identify what students can do, we can mark them and give them a score depending on their progress, depending on what they are doing. Now, what happened if your course doesn't have such rubrics or doesn't come with rubrics? Well, we're going to help you build your own.
Right. And it's not a daunting task. Creating rubrics is actually a fairly straightforward and logical process. We're going to show you how here. I'm going to play you in a moment an audio from a course book where a student is doing this task. Talk about which job would be the most difficult job in the world and why. I would like you to listen, and I would like you to listen for different language functions that you hear in the recording. And I've put 4 on the slide here. And you can tell us in the chat box, just with numbers 1, 2, 3, or 4, which of these functions do you hear in the recording? So number 1 says describes the skills required to do the job effectively. Number 2 expresses an opinion about the job. Number 3 gives background information on how he knows about the job. Number 4 talks about what it's like doing the job. Okay, so there are 4 language functions or speech acts in here. We're going to listen, and I'd like you to tell us which numbers do you hear in the recording. Okay, so hopefully my instructions are clear, and I'm going to play the recording now. And Eliane, if you don't hear it, please tell me. All right, let me go back, sorry. All right,
I
here we
just
go.
watched a TV show about air traffic controllers. That seems like a very hard job and really stressful. You need good math skills, and you need to be excellent at organization. In the show, the actor said, "I pretend that I'm playing a computer game. If I remembered the lights on the screen are airplanes with people in them, I wouldn't be able to do it. I think I have the skills for the job, but I'd be too scared of crashing an airplane."
All right, let's see the chat box. Which numbers did you hear? Not which, well, which functions did you hear? Tell us the numbers, yeah. Let's see. Would you like to hear it again? Maria says 1, 3, 4.
1, 3, 4.
All right.
Number 3.
Vanessa says 3. All right. Good. Anybody else? 2 and 3, Jose?
3.
All right. Yeah. Well, actually, the answer to this question, I'm not going to play it again because we've got lots more fun things for you to do in this session. But the answer is actually all of them. All of those functions occurred in the recording. So a bit of a trick question on our part there. But my point about this is to establish a rubric, basically what we need to do is establish what is a good performance. And luckily, most English course books nowadays in the speaking lessons begin with a listening stage, which serves as a model for the kind of performance that the students are going to do. So typically a speaking lesson begins with a listening stage where there are some comprehension questions, and then our students identify some of the language used in the recording before doing their own performance task based on the recording. And so as teachers, all we need to do to create a rubric is identify what good performance is based on the language used in the model. Right, Eliane?
That's right. And now that we find this model, now that we find what the performance we are looking for is, we now have which are the functions that we need to observe when we are assessing our student. If the student expresses all the functions we identified in this model, well, they would get 5 points when they include all of the information. And then we can actually build lower performance scores from there. If the student only includes 2 of these functions, they would got 3 points. If they included only one of the points, they would, or well, only one of the functions, they could get 1 point. Now, what happens if there is no model listening, if you don't have any video or any audio, any conversation to base your model on? Well, you can create your own and build a rubric from that. We're talking about a very simple activity that would be to you performing that actual activity, that task, and then basing your rubric on the functions that you are applying, on what you are focusing on, and of course, the information that we can get from our functions. Now then, we've seen this performance observation, we've seen the checklist. Now we have a way to actually record what our students' performance look like.
But can I just say, Eliane, as well, just one thing there as well. We focused on functions and task completion, but easily we could create vocabulary rubrics or grammar rubrics or pronunciation rubrics as well, right? So if we wanted to look for specific grammar structures in there as well, we know that we've been working on them in class. We can identify how many would constitute a top score, how many would constitute a mid score, and how many would constitute a low score. And the same would apply for vocabulary and pronunciation, all right?
That's right. And actually, now that you brought up this topic of the use of grammar in these rubrics, I think we can connect it to what we are going to see next, right, Mark? Because sometimes we teachers tend to focus a lot on what the students can do. rather than what students can actually do. We are doing these rubrics, we are observing students, and we tend to mark their mistakes, we tend to mark on what their grammatical errors are, and well, we go more to a deficiency-based approach where we are just observing what the student is doing wrong and even telling them all the time what students are doing wrong or what they should have done differently. But if we think about it, it's pretty much difficult to improve English without making these mistakes. So we cannot make students fear these mistakes or these errors. Then we should move on to a more assess-based approach. So we can focus then on what the students can do, what they are gaining, how their progress is moving, and then we can set our pathways to know what to do next. And
So,
that can be
Elian,
actually reduced to these questions, right, Mark?
yeah, sorry, I just wanted to ask you, what did you say there? Something really interesting, really interested term. You said, did you say asset? Is that what you said? Asset?
Right. Right.
So an asset-based approach rather than a deficiency-based approach, right? So as you said, rather than focus on the negatives, which would be looking for deficiencies, focusing on what students can do, and that would be an asset-based approach, right? Which I think is a really key idea. So I just wanted to emphasize that point, Elian. Sorry for interrupting you again, but I just really wanted to make sure that was important. So in trying to get away from just focusing on the grammar mistakes and the negatives, and we've all been there. I've certainly done that as a teacher as well. There are three key questions that we can ask in terms of performance assessment and classroom assessment. When we're observing our students, when we're completing checklists as they participate in production or interaction or mediation activities, we want to first ask, what is there to see? What evidence am I seeing of my students' language use here? Not just the negatives, but literally, what is the student doing with language? Once I've established that evidence, I can then try to interpret that evidence based on the language areas, the themes, the grammar structures we've worked on in the course and what I know about my students' strengths and weaknesses. And then I can put that information to use, which is the third question here, based on outcomes. How can we put our understandings to use? What can we do in future classes to support this student? And we're going to put these questions into use now. So let me introduce you to Danny. Can you tell us a little bit about Danny, Elian?
Well, Dan is going to be our student today, right? We're going to talk about this performance observation by actually doing it with Danny. So Dan is our student. He's in this primary, lower secondary level, isn't he? And we're going to imagine he's a student in our class. We want to actually assess his speaking. We want to see what he can do. And let's talk a little bit about what his course content information is. Danny's been working with certain topics and vocabulary in his classes. He can name colors, he can count, he can tell what things he find at school, vocabulary of family and friends, jobs at home, pets, and even situations at the park. Danny's been working in terms of grammar with the verb to be, with the demonstratives, and he can use, or he's supposed to use, present simple with have and like. So
I think it should say there is and there are. I hadn't noticed that was missing from our slide. My apologies there. There is and there are. Yeah.
I saw that one, but we said we're not focusing on mistakes, Mark. So
thank you. Yeah.
it was a great opportunity
Let's
for
focus
us
on
to
the
learn.
assets. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So
That is right. So
let's put this idea of as Elian says, an asset-based approach, focusing on what the student can do by observing Danny. All right. So we're going to watch and listen to Danny. You don't need to tell me in the chat, but as you're watching Danny here, I'd like you to kind of make a mental note. What can Danny do in English? What is there to see in terms of topics, language structures, functions, in terms of Danny's competencies? All right. So I'm going to ask you some questions afterwards. Just watch, make a note, and look for evidence of language use from Danny. What is there to see?
My name's Caroline. What's your name?
My name is Danny.
And how old are you, Danny?
I'm 8.
What's the day today?
It's Monday, 26th of September.
Thank you. And where do you live?
I live in San Agustín de Guadalix,
Do you live in a house or a flat?
in a house.
And how many bedrooms are there in your house?
6.
Tell me about your kitchen.
My kitchen is big, have a window, a television, a table.
Is there a fridge in your kitchen?
Yes.
Okay, look at this. This is a house. Tell me about this house.
It's big, have 4 bedrooms and 1 bathroom.
Which room is this?
Living room,
And what furniture can you see?
sofa, television, plant, and a window.
Okay, thank you. Who lives in your house with you?
My brother, my mother, and my father.
How old is your father?
He is 44.
Okay, is this 44?
No, it's 47.
Thank you. What number is this?
25.
Thank you. Is this 86?
No, it's 68.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Oh, I like the heart emoji. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Danny received both a heart and a thumbs up. I think they are
Yeah.
liking Danny.
Right. So let's see then. I'm going to ask you some questions. You can tell me yes or no in the chat box. Okay. So I'll go slowly. Lisette has given us a very full answer. Fantastic, Lisette. I just want to know then, can Danny use numbers? Tell me yes or no. Yes or no. Yes. All right. Does Danny know the rooms in the house? Yes or no? Lost. Yes, yes, yes. Does Danny know vocabulary for household objects? Yes.
Yes.
All right, now then, okay. Just to get you out of autopilot here. Does Danny always speak in complete sentences? Ooh, Maria, no, no,
Right.
no. Right. Does Danny make grammatical mistakes? Yes, he does. Yes, he does. Claudio Rocca. Yes, he does. So we are gathering evidence about Danny's language use by focusing on assets rather than just deficiencies. And as Lisette so beautifully said in the chat box, very, very complete answer, that Danny can talk about his surroundings, his family. There's so many answers in the chat that I can't find it now, but I think I remember what you said, Lisette, that he can talk about his surroundings, he can talk about his family, he can use numbers. So that's what there is to see. Now, a few moments ago, we looked, and I'm actually going to go back here, we looked at what has been covered on Danny's course. Eliane introduced us to Danny, and we saw these topics, we saw these grammatical structures. And knowing that information, I can start to interpret this evidence, right? So Danny can use a lot of vocabulary items, but he tends to speak in quite short utterances. And he doesn't make that many mistakes, but his language lacks a little bit of complexity. So what does that mean for my future classes? How can I help Danny move forward with his learning? That would be the outcomes. So then I would think, what things can I do in future classes which are going to push Danny to use more complex utterances so I can see evidence of control of things like there is and there are and some present simple forms. So you see, rather than just focusing on the negatives, we look for evidence, we connect that evidence with what's been covered in the course, and based on that information, we make decisions about what's going to happen in future classes. Right, Eliane?
That's right. And in here, the idea of this type of assessment and these questions actually lead us to work on a productive use for this assessment, for these observations, not only giving a score to student, but giving him something to work on. So as we interpret this information, what we are doing is giving him a clearer idea on what he's doing well, so he can keep doing it, and then what we can work on to help him develop into an even better learner, because Danny is already a great learner, I suppose, but he can actually do better. And we are tracing what are the steps for him to achieve that objective. Now, we showed you an example of this performance assessment, and maybe we could tell Mark teachers that if their courses come with projects, which is the case for many of our books, you can actually use this as a performance assessment. And the good thing, or the bonus thing, is that your projects also come with a self-assessment rubric. So they are these examples from Get Involved, from Share with Friends, where we can take this performance checklist, these reflections, to make your own checklist, to make your own rubrics. You have these functions already, students know the functions, we know what we are assessing, and students know them too.
Yeah, exactly. So projects, a great source for classroom and performance assessment, and another opportunity to triangulate the evidence of our learners' progress. So let's move on then to the final stage of our session today, which is the all-important topic of giving feedback, which in itself could be its own workshop. Teachers giving feedback is such an important part of the teacher's job, right? Because we want to move learning forward. We want to build students' confidence. There's also a view in the literature that we ask students questions to find out what they know and decide what to do next in a lesson, next in a course. To try and help you give useful feedback that can support your students and move learning forward, there's a very simple acronym that we can use here, which is CRAFT. I've called it the CRAFT feedback model. The C of CRAFT stands for concise and focused. So ideally, feedback would be short so that students can be bothered to read it and get straight to the point. Obviously, it would make sense if it's related to the goals of the course, right? We need feedback that is related to the goals of the course. Really importantly, the A of CRAFT refers to allocating class time for working with the feedback. So it's obviously great that we give students useful feedback, but then we need to make sure they have opportunities to work with that feedback in future lessons and put that feedback to use. And as part of that process, we want to focus on processes and strategies that they can use. So that's the F of the CRAFT model, focus on processes and strategies. How are they going to improve? And that targets future actions. Okay, so very simple acronym for good feedback, CRAFT. Okay, so let's see this in practice. Elian, let's have a look at an example here.
Let's read it together, shall we? So, Danny's English is very repetitive and he makes mistakes. He needs to work on his grammar and sentence structure, and his English is okay, but should be better at this level. So we want you teachers to think of this example, and we're going to ask you some questions. Let's see if this feedback example matches with what we said is our CRAFT feedback model. So is it concise? Is this example concise, teachers? You can tell me yes or no in the chat.
Is it concise? Yeah.
Some of them say it is not. Yeah, it is very general, right? Very generic. We think that maybe it can be the only good characteristic of this example is that it's concise in some points, like at the end, at the first sentence that says he's very repetitive and he makes mistakes. Well, I think that it is like a 50-50, right?
maybe Elian, maybe all the no's here are for the CRAFT model in general. But if we focus on the question of concise, I mean, I think it is concise, but that's probably the only good thing that we could say about it, right, Elian?
Yeah, if we think about it, if it is related to learning goals, we're not seeing any connection. They're not mentioned. It does not allocate class time for improvement. It is not focusing on any strategies or processes. It's not giving us much to work on. It's not giving any extra help or extra steps. It's not actually telling student what he can do to improve or what are the next steps. So I think we could call this as a weak example, Mark.
Yeah, I think this is quite a weak example of feedback if we base it on the CRAFT model. Now, let me show you then a different example. This is example 2, and it says, Danny did a great job using numbers and vocabulary for describing his home and his family. To improve, he can try to use longer sentences with there is, it has, he likes. We'll do some extra practice with the present forms to make his sentences more complex next week. Keep working hard. Danny. Now, if you said that the last one wasn't concise, this one's longer, but it's not too long, right? So, I mean, this is Suni Anai says this is the best feedback. Well, it's concise. Is it related to learning goals? Yes or no? Does it? Yes, Maria says it relates to the specific learning goals here. It talks about vocabulary for describing home and his family. Does it allocate class time for working with feedback? Right. Yes, it does, right? It refers to some class time next week. Does it focus on processes and strategies? Right. You would probably say yes. I see lots of yes in the chat. I've kind of lost track now. I'm trying to read your minds, guys. Does it focus on processes and strategies? Well, it talks about extra practice for making his sentences more complex, and it targets future actions. So based on this acronym of CRAFT, concise and focused, relate to learning goals, allocate class time for working with feedback, focus on processes and strategies, and target future actions, this would be a better example. And I think this is quite a useful acronym for when you're giving students written feedback. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this masterclass. On the slide here, I put some further reading in case you're interested in learning more about the science of assessment, because creating evaluations, assessments, exams is quite a difficult thing to do. There's a fantastic book from Penny McKay, which I think was published now 25 years ago, but it's still my go-to source for anything related to assessment, assessing young learners. And there was a recent book also from Oxford by Bachman and Dambok on language assessment for classroom teachers, which is very, very practical. So thanks very much for listening to us. I don't know if you have any further comments you'd like to add, Elian.
Yeah, I just would add that we have to start seeing assessment as part of our everyday practice, seeing it as a formal process that students' learning is not just a final exam. And finally, I would just add that we shouldn't forget how impactful it is to provide constructive feedback that allows students to track their progress
and move forward.
and move forward. So
Yeah.
thank you very much.